In the previous video, I explained 7 common symptoms of low compression, and now I want to show you why it gets low compression. So here's the top 5 reasons that I've run into on two-stroke dirt bikes. Number 1 is a worn piston ring. This is when the ring end gap is too big. When you're installing a new piston kit or a new ring, you always want to check the gap with a feeler gauge, and it should be within the minimum and maximum, because if it's too tight it can potentially seize, whereas if it's too big then the ring isn't going to be sealing as well and it's not going to have as much compression. This is totally normal wear and tear on a two-stroke, and it's usually the first thing to get worn out. Reason number 2 is a worn or scored piston. When it gets worn, the piston diameter decreases just due to natural wear and tear from all the friction. So when there's too big of a gap between the piston and the cylinder, that's going to result in less compression because more air and fuel is leaking past that gap. Or if it's scored, which is essentially a scratch or a gouge in the piston side itself, like on the skirt, even if the piston is the right size, if it has a big scratch that you can feel like with your nail, that's going to cause a loss in compression. Can also cause more friction on the cylinder itself. So if the piston's scored, then you want to get that fixed or replaced as soon as possible if it hasn't already scored the cylinder. This can happen from warming it up too quickly, not using the right oil or not enough oil, or just part of the piston melting away from poor jetting. And if your two-stroke is bogging, I got a video here that shows whether it's rich or lean. Reason number 3 is a worn or scored cylinder. The cylinders typically last longer than a piston because they're nickel plated, which is extremely hard, and it's more expensive to replate or replace. So if you're measuring front to back, it's good, but if you're measuring side to side, it's too big. That means it's out of round and out of tolerance, and you're going to have less compression. Or if there's a taper in the bore, where if you're checking at the top, it's still good, but at the bottom, it's too big, or vice versa, you're going to have less compression. Or if you have scratches or gouges in the cylinder wall, or if the cross hatchings are gone, like the plating is wearing away, that's probably a sign that it's too big and worn out. Problem number 4 is a blown head gasket. Now the piston and cylinder, they might still be fine if you catch it right away, but a blown head gasket can cause a loss of compression because the combustion pressure is blowing into the water cooling system, and this can cause the coolant to spit out the overflow hose, which I cover in another video here. So if coolant's leaking out the overflow and the cap is still good, then you might have a blown head gasket. And if you do have a blown head gasket, make sure that the cylinder and the head are flat, because I had a CR125 where I replaced the head gasket twice and it still had the same problem of spitting coolant out the overflow, and it wasn't until I took the head off and sanded it down flat until I truly fixed the problem because it was warped. Problem number 5 is worn reeds. So the reeds are right after the carburetor and before the piston and cylinder itself. The reeds are constantly flapping open and closed, and if they're worn out, so they're always open or they're cracked around the edges, they're not going to be sealing as well, and you're not going to have as much compression. These are pretty easy and cheap to replace, so if you happen to have the carb off, I would recommend checking the reeds as well at the same time. And if you want to learn the top mistakes that two-stroke owners make that cause their bike to blow up in half the time, I got a free guide. It's super short and practical PDF. The link is in the description below to download that. I'm Kelly Figure from MX Hideout. Ride safe. Have fun.